My name is Rebecca Johnson, and I love Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And I am publishing a series of videos exploring the reasons why I am such a fan of Zack Snyder's film. In this series, you'll find my thoughts on topics that matter to me, like Larry Fong's cinematography, character analysis on Lex Luthor and Lois Lane, the Christian imagery, what I find hopeful about the movie, and yes, I'll address the critical reception. So if you're interested in any of those topics, I hope you will get something out of this series and find out why Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice has had such a profound, heartfelt, and inspiring impact on my life. Welcome to the Duck Milk Prod YouTube channel. My name is Rebecca Johnson, and this live stream is part of a series I'm calling Reading Reviews with Rebecca. Put a lot of quotation marks in there, which will analyze the critical reception of Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice through the negative reviews written by top critics from Rotten Tomatoes, one review at a time. This is not meant to belittle anyone's opinions, but rather serve as a study of art criticism and how we discuss film. And I'm hoping that as we go through this, that maybe this endeavor will encourage us all to be better consumers of cinema. Well, today I'm going to be reading through a review. So difficult to say, lots of R's. Reading through a review from BuzzFeed titled Batman v Superman is not the important movie it wants so badly to be, written by Alison Willmore. The link to this review is in the video description below if you'd like to follow along and read for yourself. I encourage you to do so because I want you to see that I'm not making this up. This is a real review from Rotten Tomatoes and Rotten Tomatoes lists of top critics. So I want you to see it for yourself. And to Alison Willmore, if she ever sees this video, I just want to say that I'm aiming to do this as civilly and analytically as possible. And I would ask that anyone watching live or posting in the comments would do the same. I am simply taking a look at the criticism for and of BVS now from an historical point of view, given that these reviews were used by Warner Brothers in their decision-making process regarding the DC Extended Universe. Due to the poor reviews for Batman v Superman, the tone and approach to the franchise were changed for Justice League and ultimately led to the destruction of the Snyderverse. And before I get into Alison's thoughts, I know some people might be watching this and saying, Alison Willmore is a bona fide film critic from a major outlet. Who cares what you have to say, Rebecca? And look, I get it. It's a fair question to ask. I would probably ask it too. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to tell you a little bit about me and my background. I graduated from the University of Alabama, Roll Tide, with a degree in telecommunications and film and a focus on broadcast television production. While I've never been to film school, in my television and production experience, I've learned about and have lots of practice in operating cameras, shot composition, and editing. Lighting, green screen, and audio are my weak spots, admittedly, but I've been working on those. After working in local TV news, running cameras, and working in production, I got a job at Turner, now Warner Media, or whatever they're calling themselves now, for 14 years. I worked with networks, or brands as they call them now, like TBS, TNT, Adult Swim, Cartoon Network, Boomerang, True TV, and Turner Classic Movies as a video encoding specialist. I also did a fair amount of closed captioning work and DVD and Blu-ray QC. In case you are wondering how I podcasted about Supergirl and the DCEU films while working for a Time Warner company, I actually got permission and clearance from my human resources representative. If you think I wouldn't criticize stories that were under the same corporate umbrella, that was never a problem nor a concern for me. If I thought the Supergirl TV series or a DCEU film had faults, I said so. In the last 17 years, I have served as a director, technical director, and camera operator at my local church in a live production capacity. I've been a video editor for 17 years, having worked in Avid, Final Cut, and Premiere Pro CC. In my day job, I shoot and edit news and documentary-style video content that involves interviews and narrative storytelling. I'm also currently an amateur photographer and am aiming to improve my efforts in still photography. You can check out my work over at Instagram at @TheDerbyKid. Link is in the video description below. While discussing these film reviews, music and film scores will inevitably come up. It may be good to know that in my life I have played piano, handbells, clarinet, bass clarinet, bassoon, acoustic guitar, and have even started learning how to play the ukulele. I've played in marching bands, symphonic bands, and wind ensembles, and have sung in many choirs. While I don't consider myself a world-class musician, far from it actually, I do know some things about music and am a big fan of film scores and soundtracks. In addition to my production and musical experience, I have had lots of experience in art criticism. I've been podcasting about television and film since 2009 and do so on a regular basis with Supergirl Radio, a podcast I co-host about the CW Supergirl TV series. I am also a writing contributor to the Justice League Universe podcast that offers analysis on the DCEU films. You might even hear my voice occasionally in recordings and audio commentaries over there. I'm not an expert, but I care deeply about film, television, storytelling, and art. So I hope this gives you a background on where I'm coming from. All right, so let's get into the review from Alison Willmore of BuzzFeed. And the best place to start usually for me is the headline or the title of the piece. For this one, it's titled, "Batman v Superman is not the important movie it wants so badly to be." My question is, who says? I guess Alison says. She maybe should have titled this, quote, "I don't think Batman v Superman is the important movie it wants so badly to be," unquote. That way, it's from her perspective, and she's not speaking for everyone on the planet, because maybe someone else might think it's an important movie. Like I do, like so many other people do. So I would strongly encourage anyone who wants to be a film critic or a movie reviewer. Is there a difference? Remember, we are asking that question. So I hope to have an answer about that by the time we get to the end of this experiment. So let's think on film critics and film reviewers. Are they the same thing? But if anybody wants to be one of either of those titles, or if they're the same thing, I don't know. We'll have to see. But if you want to review something or critique something, my personal philosophy is not to write or speak like this. You cannot and you should not speak for everyone. Talk about a film from your point of view. That actually is better because then people get to hear your personal thoughts, and you might have a different voice from someone else in their thoughts. So I would encourage people not to write as if they're speaking their opinion as fact. And I find that a lot of these reviews do that. The subheading for this review is, quote, "Zack Snyder's new superhero movie doesn't reinvent the genre or even do anything interesting with it, but boy, does it try," unquote. Alison is doing the same thing here in speaking for the entire audience. Also, I just have this question. Should we be going into every film expecting it to reinvent the genre? Because that seems like a high expectation that most films couldn't reach. I mean, you probably go into making a film wanting to do big things like reinventing a genre, but not every film's going to do that. And I don't think we should have to have those expectations. And I know I don't. A lot of times I will go into a film with very low expectations just because I think that's the fair way to start. I want the film to prove itself to me. I want the film to teach me something or to entertain me somehow or make me think. Those are the expectations that I have for a film. I don't have these big expectations for a film to just do something mind-blowing. I think that's the wrong way to approach a film as an audience member. I think you should just want to go into a film and be entertained on some level. And honestly, I don't think that Alison can dictate this. I'm sure she's a very nice lady. I appreciate that she wrote a review, but is Alison the arbiter of whether or not that Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice reinvents the genre? Because a lot of my experience with film history is that history will determine whether something reinvented the genre. People may point to films like The Dark Knight having reinvented some things about the genre, making, serious, making caped stories, superhero stories into a more dramatic cinematic experience that took itself seriously. You might argue that The Dark Knight did that. You might argue that another Batman film like Batman 89 sort of reinvented the genre. Or You could even go back to Superman, the movie from 1978, and you could say, well, that really did something for the genre of superhero movies that nobody else can top. And a lot of people to this day still argue that. And so I think that there are very few among these types of films that actually do reach that level. So I don't know. I'm just like, Allison, pipe down a little bit, because you can't go into every film expecting it to be that. Not to say that you can't have a certain expectation for it, but I think history is actually going to tell us if a film reinvented the genre, not necessarily a film critic from BuzzFeed or circa March 24th, 2016, when it was just starting to come out. And there's an argument to be made that BVS definitely left its stamp on the genre, given how many times it's been referenced in other TV shows, films, comics, as well as how it's being discussed many years later after its release. Most comic book movies are forgotten within about 3 months of their release. And Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, I've seen from what I can see on the internet or in discussions I've had with people IRL in real life, Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice is still a film that's being discussed even now, 6 years later. 6 years later? Yes, 6 years later. No, 5 years later. Doing my math wrong. So, and I've even seen people having changed their opinion and their minds on the film as a whole after seeing the Ultimate Edition. So I think looking back on this, it's interesting to see how things have changed for BVS than when it first came out, and people had these expectations for it, and how the conversation has shifted a little bit over time. People have started to warm up to Batman v Superman. Not everybody, but it's getting warmer. So I think this is one of those films where history will continue to look favorably on Batman v Superman as it ages like a fine wine. So yeah, that's it's an interesting thing to note there, even just right at the beginning with these headlines here. Let's see. See some things about what we were just talking about in the chat. So Dennis or Denis, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce your name. Let me know in the comments or in the live chat if I've pronounced it wrong. So my apologies. But they said the same thing about It's a Wonderful Life, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and Blade Runner. That's something to keep in mind, and that's something that I would like to continue doing research on. That a lot of these films, and what's interesting, especially about It's a Wonderful Life, is that it was panned early on after it was released, and it didn't become the Christmas favorite that it is today until it was rerun on TV, until TV stations needed something to show, and they would rerun it and rerun it. And the more people watched it and the more people sat through it, they became fans of it. They really enjoyed it. And so it's become this Christmas classic these days. But when it first came out, it was not looked upon as something that everyone enjoyed. So I think that that's really something to keep in mind, is that the more that you watch something, I know it was for me with Batman v Superman, the more I saw it, the more I got something out of it every time. And I would probably even go as far to say A Space Odyssey is similar. I mean, it's kind of a weird movie. I mean, it has an evil robot and a space baby at the end, and a mysterious obelisk that pops up through time. But you know, the more that you watch it, the more you think about it, you might come away with some different conclusions every time you see it. So I think that's one of the things that we're going to find through this experiment. And it's going to play into some things that I want to talk about when we wrap this all up, because I think there are some suggestions to be made how to maybe make film criticism a little better. So we'll get to that when we get close to the end. But that's a really good point, that there's a lot of films that we consider beloved today that are critic, looked upon favorably by critics, but back in their day, they were not. So I think that's something to keep in mind. History has been good to those films. Let's see. David says, I would have thought that post-World War II and at the opening of the Cold War, people would have wanted some nice Christian hope and optimism. Actually, if you look into it, I believe was it Coppola who made Sorry, I'm trying to make sure I say this correctly. It's a Wonderful Life. Make sure I speak correctly so that I don't. No, it's Frank Capra. That's right. I don't know why I had Coppola on my brain, but Frank Capra, I guess it was the C name. But Frank Capra talked about how he made It's a Wonderful Life to combat atheism, a growing atheism that was going on in the country at the time. So that's really interesting. If you want to dig into that, that's something that I continually want to dig into because when I found that, I was like, whoa, that's big. So anyway, that's something else to keep in mind with It's a Wonderful Life because it does involve angels and that kind of thing. Okay, and since this is not and It's a Wonderful Life review, maybe one time, maybe one time I'll do that. I'll talk about It's a Wonderful Life, but we are talking about Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. So I'm going to get back to Allison's review here. She goes on to say, Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice turns Lex Luthor into a tech bro. Played by Jesse Eisenberg, this new version of Superman's archenemy is a twitchy, fast talker in a graphic tee and blazer with shoulder-length hair. Yeah. Yes, there's some luxurious she says luxuriant locks. Shooting hoops in LexCorp's in-office basketball court while plotting how to disrupt superheroics using the scraps of kryptonite he's been buying up. He's positioned, at least at first, to be Mark Zuckerberg as a supervillain. He treats government regulations as a jumping-off point for negotiations rather as rules to be followed, making grand pronouncements about superpower humans. Maybe she means superpowered humans. Superpowered humans as the basis for our myths, while he bargains for special access to Kryptonian tech under the table. I find this in looking back on it, the idea that people connected Mark Zuckerberg with a villain, I kind of think is is interesting. But I guess there is some of that to be talked about. This is a strange opening paragraph, in my opinion. If Allison was going to look at Batman v Superman through the lens of the Lex Luthor character, I would understand this opening paragraph a little more. But this is kind of the most she talks about Lex Luthor. And so I find it strange that she opens with this. There's no real introductory paragraph to this. There's no formal introduction about her thoughts to get into. There's no, usual structure of intro, body of the piece, and then conclusion. There's nothing like that. It just kind of opens up like we were already talking about it. So I think that's kind of strange that she just starts like she's writing the body of the essay. So I just have a question. I have this question with a lot of these reviews. Did Allison not have an editor helping her with this? Was she just writing her first draft and turning it in? I don't know. I think if I was the editor, I think I would encourage her to write a stronger opening to the piece. And even so, with that first paragraph, the entire first paragraph is just describing what happens in the film. It offers really no actual substance from the writer that you couldn't get from the trailer. It's just a lot of describing what happens in the film, and we're going to see that happen a lot in this review. Allison mentions shoulder-length hair, and I wonder if that's supposed to be a negative for the character of Lex Luthor. She may not know this, or she may not have known this at the time, but Jesse's Lex is somewhat modeled in appearance after the Birthright Lex Luthor. He looks a lot like that, who has a similar hairstyle. I do agree that he has some luxuriant locks, but let's see. I couldn't find a good image online, so I just opened up my my copy of Birthright. So there's Lex Luthor, right? Ooh, can't get it to. I think I just tore a page. This is old anyway. I cannot get there. Okay, so this redheaded guy is Lex Luthor. So you can see that he has some longer hair in that, and it's not out of character for Lex to look like that. He actually looks like a comic book version of the character, and Lex Luthor does typically have red hair when he's not bald. So that was actually very comic book accurate. Allison goes on to say, quote, this take on Lex is like the placement of Gotham and Metropolis as Oakland, San Francisco sibling cities, provocative, or it would be, or it better developed. If it didn't turn out to be a surface level reworking of your standard issue megalomaniac. Eisenberg's performance has the trappings of a techno librarian tweaked into exaggerated comic book nastiness with none of the follow through. Lex ultimately plots to take down Superman due to daddy issues and something or other about God, but mostly because taking down Superman is what Lex Luthor is supposed to do. Oh, that is a lot. Okay, so let's kind of examine this. So, how is this take, Jesse Eisenberg's take on Lex Luthor, not developed well? That would be my main question here. We know about his childhood. We know about his father. We know about why Lex wants to go after Superman. We know about LexCorp. We know that Lex tries to put on a public face of philanthropy with the Metropolis community. So he's kind of got his own a little bit of secret identity. We see Lex making deals with government officials. We see Lex learning about Kryptonian technology inside the scout ship. We see Lex manipulating Wallace Keith to use as a bomb in the Capitol building. We see Lex acquiring kryptonite. We see Lex facing off against Lois Lane as Superman. We see Lex creating Doomsday. We see Lex get arrested. We see Lex become the iconic bald version of the character. My question then is, what more development for Lex do you need? What more to his story do you need in this 2.5 version of the film? I thought that the film does quite a good job of laying out his past and his family and what drives him and how he accomplishes his evil goals, which he does. He ends up winning at the end of this film because Superman ends up dead. So I think that they, Zack Snyder, Chris Terrio, Jesse Eisenberg, I think they did a really great job developing Lex. So I have a lot of questions about that part of this review. Allison goes on to say, quote, let's see. Did I skip a section? Let me make sure, because there was something that I wanted to talk about. And I wanted to make sure I hadn't gotten there yet. Okay. All right. Good. Okay. So Allison goes on to say, quote, Lex ultimately plots to take down Superman due to daddy issues and something or other about God, unquote. What I find disappointing about this review is that a statement like that is not even attempting to do a reading on Lex Luthor's motivations, not even attempting to dig into it whatsoever. What was Lex saying about his daddy issues and about God? That his father abused him and Lex felt like God never came to his aid when he was in trouble. He wanted to prove that God was a fraud and was using Superman as a God substitute to do it. This is important character motivation that is outright dismissed by the writer of this review. And I think that's really unfortunate because if you really wanted to examine story and character, maybe that would be something that you would get into and not sarcastically dismiss it as something or other about God. That seems a little, to be quite honest, a little lazy in my opinion. Allison goes on to say, quote, like so much of Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, which was directed by Man of Steel Zack Snyder, the blatant millennial, this is a big word, millennialification of Lex Luthor is an intriguing tease to some grander reading that simply isn't there. The film is a lumbering, glum, cool-toned behemoth that labors to lay groundwork for a DC cinematic universe while setting up two famous characters on a collision course and lobs out big ideas like an underprepared undergrad sweatily pitching off the cuff thesis topics. Superman, played by Henry Cavill, the movie submits as a messianic figure, a giver of hope, floating, beautiful, Beatifally. Beatifically? I've never heard that word in my life. Let's look this word up because I'm going to have to get Allison to teach me a word here. Let's see. I'm going to go. There's a definition here from the Free Dictionary saying showing or producing exalted joy or blessedness. It's a weird word. I don't know exactly how to say it. It looks like it should have a U in there, but it doesn't. But floating midair with his cape flapping around him while supplicants reach out in tears. More important as a symbol than as a man of individual actions. Superman is also a little like America in terms of international intervention. He requires you to trust that his actions are all in the interest of the greater good. Because what are you going to do? Fight the guy? It's fine when he's saving people from a flaming building, but when he crashes in what Deadpool has dubbed the superhero landing into a tense situation in Africa involving Lois, Amy Adams, given a gratifying amount to do, his interference sparks unforeseen consequences, unquote. Okay, first of all, Alison writes, quote, some grander reading that simply isn't there, unquote. Let's stop and talk a little bit about Lex Luthor's Banksy shirt, shall we? So she mentions, let's see, where does she mention this? Hang on a second. I want to make sure, I'm like, I'm making sure that my notes are not ahead of myself. Okay, so up at the top of the review, Alison mentions the graphic tee that Lex Luthor is wearing in the film. In the first paragraph, she puts it out there, but she doesn't mention that what it's actually a reference to. That it's a reference to Banksy, who is an England-based street artist, political activist, and film director whose real name and identity remain unconfirmed and the subject of speculation. And that the t-shirt that Lex is wearing includes the imagery of a monkey detonating a bomb, which is fitting because Lex Luthor orchestrates the Capitol bombing later in the film and does so in a secretive way that nobody can point to him, using Wallace Keefe's wheelchair as the bomb. And it's important to point out when Lex wears this Banksy graphic tee, as Alison would put it. He wears it when he meets with Senator Finch and Senator Barrows, two of the people who die in the Capitol bombing. That graphic tee foreshadows one of the most consequential sequences in Batman v Superman. So I bring that up to get back to the part of Alison's review where she says maybe there is no grander reading to the film. And my question is, maybe there's no grander reading to Alison because she's probably not looking for it. And here's a tip for people who want to review anything, whether it be films, television shows, literature, music, what have you. My philosophy about reviewing things and critiquing things is I like to ask the question, why? Why covers a whole lot of things. And if you ask the question why, it might lead you to exploring things about the thing that you want to learn about and review. I've experienced the fact that great creators have reasons for why they do everything, why they choose the music they do, why they choose the set they do, why do they write the dialogue they do, why do they put the actors in the clothing that they do. There's always a reason. They have to go over everything. Why is their hair the way it is? Why is their makeup like it is? There's always a reason for these kinds of things. So when you ask the question why, you're able to dig into those reasons. Why is Lex Luthor wearing a shirt with a monkey detonating a bomb on it? See if you can ask that question, and maybe you'll find something. Maybe you won't. Maybe the creator hasn't given any thought to it, but it's worth exploring. You might encounter something the creator wanted you to see, or you might find out something personal about yourself. And either way, you would get a grander reading in doing so. So I don't think you're ever going to get there. You're never going to get to a grander reading of something if you ignore that question and dismiss the creative piece entirely. So why is Lex Luthor wearing that very, very specific graphic tee? It's used as a foreshadowing element to point to the Capitol bombing later on in the film. And that's very early on when we first meet Lex Luthor. So it's very clever why he's wearing that graphic tee. And it's unfortunate that Alison here doesn't get there. Alison also writes, quote, this film lobs out big ideas like an underprepared undergrad sweatily pitching off the cuff thesis topics, unquote. All right. So, what big ideas and thesis topics are she referring to? Is one of them Superman as a messianic figure? If so, what was her problem with that? Was it not done well? Was was it confusing? Did it not make any sense? What did the film not do well when it came to that big idea? I wish I knew more about that. Is it that she thinks that Superman is just a symbol and doesn't engage in individual actions? If so, I'm a little confused about that because we do see Superman in individual actions helping and saving people in Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. She also goes on to talk about America a little bit. And even though I don't agree with Alison's thoughts on America, she's talking about the international intervention. I at least appreciate that she's engaging with the film story. She's actually talking about the problems that Superman is going through, the conflict that he's thinking about, and hearing other people speak about, like Senator Finch. He's actually having to deal with the consequences of his actions and what they do for politics around the world and how he's representing the United States in some respects. So I like that Alison here is actually engaging with the film story and trying to work that out for herself. She mentions Deadpool in here, and I don't know why she would need to mention the Deadpool comment in this paragraph. Is it just to be cute and paint herself as well versed in other comic book movies and the comic book movie genre? Because that's all I can think of. Because it's not as if Superman doing a superhero landing is out of the ordinary in comic book movies, and superheroes just do that. It wouldn't have needed to come from Deadpool from you to point that out. And I think, in fact, that's probably the entire premise of that Deadpool joke, is that all superheroes do that. The last part of this paragraph is again describing the plot, which this review, again, seems to do quite a bit. But I like that she points out that Amy Adams gets a lot to do in the film. That's something that I agree with. I think Amy Adams' Lois Lane is one of the big characters in the film, and she gets a really strong storyline, especially in the Ultimate Edition when you get there. But Alison wasn't talking about that cut of the film at this time. So even in the theatrical version, Alison thought that Amy Adams' Lois Lane got a lot to do. I agree with that, and I would say, and I would agree that it's gratifying to see. So I'm glad that she pointed that out, because a lot of these reviews will say that the female characters in the film are not handled well. So it's good to see that somebody did want to point that out, that she actually had a strong presence in the film. Let's see. Tommy P says, basically they wanted Lex to be like the versions in the animated series voiced by Clancy Brown. Yeah, I think a lot of people had certain expectations of what Lex Luthor should act like or should look like, even though Lex has taken on a variety of looks over the many decades that he's been around. Let's see. Let me look and see about some other comments that I missed while I was reading. Yeah, and Dennis or Denise says, Lex Luthor has changed so many times that the comic accuracy argument barely counts anymore. Yeah, I would agree. I think as long as you can sense who the character is in the portrayal, I think that's all that matters. I'm more willing to go with variations on the character as long as I know that the guy Lex Luthor is in there somewhere. Let's see. Okay. All right, so let's continue on. So Alison writes, quote, Batman, played by Ben Affleck, on the other hand, takes the micro to Superman's macro as a self-appointed answer to Gotham's governmental failings policing the streets in a way that doesn't have to reckon with inconvenient rights and processes. He's rage disguised as righteousness, a one-man militia in bulky bat armor righting the wrongs that the cops can't manage to keep up with. Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice begins by running us through young Bruce Wayne's oft-documented parental trauma once more before catching up with him as an embittered, incredibly ripped 40-something who's maybe losing his grip a little, living down the road from the burned remains of Wayne Manor with his butler-turned-co-conspirator Alfred, played by Jeremy Irons. This road-worn version of Batman is vengeful and exacting, unafraid to kill, and inclined to literally brand the criminals he catches with his logo, a mark that we're told dooms them when they go to prison, unquote. So the entire section on Batman here is just describing Batman in the film. Allison puts a couple of flourishes on some of these descriptions, but this is not giving me really much of Allison's take on the film, which I would love to know her thoughts on what is it exactly she thinks about the film or what she thinks about Batman. But she's really just recapping it. And so it makes me wonder, is this supposed to be a recap or is it a film critic review? Is it a critique? Is it a review? What is it? I guess to me, that doesn't really seem as much like a review because you're not sharing your personal thoughts on it. You're not sharing your perspective. You're just recapping what happens in the film. Okay, so Allison goes on to say, quote, Batman's a vigilante and Superman's a god, which is the basis of their disagreement. Though Lord Almighty, does the movie take a long time laying that out. In the hour and a half lead up to the promised showdown, disagreements between the two simmer and build and are partially articulated during a cocktail party encounter between Bruce and Clark Kent, in which they politely snipe at each other about superhero puff pieces and civil liberties being trampled. What neither arrive at, though they should, is that Batman and Superman actually both do what they want and answer to no one, and that they should stop talking sense. Incredibly, they both lack self-awareness. The film doesn't find space to fill their characters out in more than broad swaths, but manages to make them both unappealing, having a superheroic pissing match that turns into a literal grappling over the moral high ground. It's an unusual achievement in a superhero. I guess she means superhero film. It's an unusual achievement in a superhero. Or maybe she's just talking about a superhero as a guy. It's an unusual achievement in a superhero, if not the one that Snyder and writers Chris Terrio and David S. Goyer were likely aiming for, making two iconic characters look like political candidates in a race in which there's no desirable winner, unquote. The first sentence in this paragraph is somewhat of an actual criticism, so I appreciate that. Taking a stab at the story while pointing out the length. Even though I had no problem with the length myself, this is at least Allison trying to say, I liked this, or I liked this, or I disliked this, which is refreshing since most of this review is just telling you what happens in the film. I also like Allison's attempt at analyzing both Superman and Batman's characters and how they are represented in BBS, pointing out that they don't answer to anyone and lack a certain amount of awareness. I wouldn't exactly agree with her 2 points because Superman does put himself in front of a United States Senate hearing wanting to answer to the public and the government's questions. One could argue that Batman answers to Alfred. Alfred keeps him accountable. And I also think that Clark Kent and Superman, he has a lot of self-awareness. Bruce, though, is clouded for a good bit of the film, and he has to be called out by Alfred. So even though I don't agree with her conclusions there, I do appreciate that there's some actual perspective that she's showing in this section. So sometimes, you got to point that out when you see it. All right, let's continue on. Okay, so Allison says, quote, in an early sequence, one of the best in the movie and definitely the most evocative, we see the World Engine battle from the finale of Man of Steel from the ground as Bruce races through the streets of Metropolis just in time to see his own building crumble, with some employees still trapped inside. From Superman's perspective, it was a fight to save humanity from extinction. From Bruce's point of view, it was a melee unfolding with no concern for collateral damage, one that costs people's lives for whom he feels directly responsible. The mid-city havoc-wreaking brawl seems like it would tee the movie up to grapple with the notions of the greater good versus innocent lives lost versus why couldn't you have fought over I wouldn't say this word, but the GD Ocean or something. But it doesn't. Instead, the scene is used in order to get Batman thinking that if there is even the slightest chance of Superman breaking bad, he's got to go, unquote. I appreciate here that Allison is willing to objectively admit that the flashback sequence to return to the Battle of Metropolis was well done. I agree. I think they got it down to even, the very specific parts of the heat vision going through the building. So it's one of my favorite sequences in the film, and I think it gives you a good sense of Bruce's perspective during what we saw in Man of Steel. Allison then proceeds to tell the reader what she wanted the film to do, what she wanted the film to be, instead of digging into what it actually did. I know this is a very easy thing to do, and a very easy thing to give into, because sometimes we think we know best. We're fans, we're reviewers, we think we know best about how a story should go. But in my opinion, as a reviewer, I don't think you should do this. I don't think you can do this. Because if you're reviewing something, if you're critiquing something, you have to look at what the piece of art is doing, and you have to discuss that, because that's your job. If you're going to judge a film, you can't judge it on what you wanted it to be. You have to judge it on what it is. So maybe if I was the editor, if Allison didn't like the conclusion that Bruce Wayne came to, maybe she could write about that, write about what actually happened, write about that conclusion that Bruce Wayne came to, and write why you disagree. That would be if I was Allison's editor. I don't know where her editor was here, but it doesn't seem like there was an attempt to do any kind of editing or nudging her to share more of her thoughts, which, is not on Allison. There should be somebody there to say, okay, you think this, why don't you continue to explore that? That's what I would do if I was the editor. Let's see. Noah says, while we're stopped here, one thing I like about this review is that it seems clear from all the details she includes that she was really paying attention to the movie, or at least paying more attention than most. All right. So yeah, maybe you could, I sort of think that maybe you could still get some of this from the trailers. I don't know how much of it is. I don't know if she's saying enough to make me think she watched the film, because there are some aspects of this that you could probably have gotten out of just by watching the trailers. Now, maybe that Clark and Bruce scene when they're talking about the puff pieces, some of that was in the trailers, but at least she did pay attention to some of these things enough to write about them in some regard, and enough to describe them. She describes them in great detail. So I don't know. I appreciate your thoughts, Noah. I don't know. I remain unconvinced. But we'll continue on with these, because we'll read some of these reviews where I'm like, did this person actually read this? Did they actually watch this film? So we're going to encounter some of those. So that might be something that we discuss. Maybe we'll sort of look at those. Do we think that this person actually watched the film? Keep that in mind. All right, so we'll continue to go on with Allison's review. She writes, quote, it's a false opposition. These two points of view that have been placed counter to each other. They're just skirmishing over whose version of saving the world is better, which she means naturally, when their goals are compatible. Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice is grimly self-serious. At one point, I feel like there should be a period after Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice is grimly self-serious, period. Next start of sentence. At one point, it even summoned Superman for a congressional hearing. But the film is not morally complex, especially when it comes to the idea of self-appointed heroes. It's all for the rights and the responsibilities of the superheroic class to help out as they see fit, no matter how many panic dreams, or are they visions, Batman has of a scary soups gone rogue. If the two superheroes want to have a fight in the middle of an urban center, well, that's what's going to happen, and that's how Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice brings the action back around without any apparent irony. This time the battle's in Gotham, where the urban decay works in the combatants' favor by giving them unpopulated acreage to destroy. At this time, Wonder Woman, played by Gal Gadot, is there to help the whole movie, and she steals it just by virtue of looking like she's having a good time, whether she's trading barbs with Bruce at a posh party or grinning at a lumpy monster inserted into the final act of the movie to enable a big calamitous finish. Okay, Allison, finally is giving me some of her perspective in this paragraph. I really like that. It took us a while to get there, but we're starting to get some of her actual thoughts on the film. So I'm liking this. I may not agree with it, but I'm finally getting to see more of her come out in this review, and that's what I want in any reviews. I want to see what your perspective is. The only thing, one of the things that I disagree with here, even though I appreciate her sharing her perspective, is that Alison writes that the film is grimly self-serious. Okay, how? Because Superman attends a Senate hearing? Why is that a negative thing given the story and how he's having to deal with the consequences of his action and what they do for the United States and the world? Alison also says the film is not morally complex. In my notes, you guys can't see it, but I put the film is not morally complex, question mark, question mark, question mark. I put 3 of them in there because I find that an interesting critique. I find that there's a lot of moral complexity here in this film. You have Superman doubting himself. You have Batman wanting to seek revenge. There's even a discussion about the problem of evil, which is one of the main arguments and philosophical debates about morality. It examines doing the right thing, even if someone might hate or criticize you for it. It shows what happens when someone takes revenge too far. You know, this film talks about the problem of evil. It talks about doing the right thing. It talks about taking revenge too far. It even has thematic elements about God versus man. A man literally wrestles with a god, lower G. I think there's a lot of morally complex issues in this film. What you need to do for the people who have been injured, for the people who died. Clark talks about wanting to do something for the people of Gotham. You know, who decides who gets stories written about them? Who decides what's good? Senator Finch mentions that. There's a lot of aspects of this film that talk about moral issues. So I'm very confused about saying that there's no moral complexity in Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice when it's mostly about moral complexity. One thing I do also like about this section is there's more than just describing things that happen in the film in this paragraph. If I was Alison's editor, again, I don't know if anybody was, but if I was the editor for Alison on this piece, I would have nudged her to write about the differences between the Battle of Metropolis for Man of Steel and the fight in Gotham during Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice. It seems like Alison wants to go there, but she doesn't. She sort of stops. I mean, you could write about how the Battle of Metropolis was done during the daytime with Superman and Zod flying around skyscrapers with a bustling city beneath them, whereas in Gotham and BVS, the fight is among, as Alison puts it, urban decay with nobody around, and it's dark and stormy, and it all seems empty and like everything was falling apart. I don't know about anybody else, but I would read that. I would read that essay or that review. So I think that that's something that she's really close to digging into. You could talk about Metropolis and an affluent, probably a more affluent society where people are successful and rich and enjoying life. And Gotham is where people struggle and are down on their luck. You could talk about those differences and why that informs Superman and Batman as heroes and characters. You could really dig into that. So it's unfortunate that she didn't here. I would agree with Alison, though, that Wonder Woman does steal the show in her scenes. Gal was so good in Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, so I'm glad that somebody gave it up to her for that. I do also think it's so funny that this is yet another reviewer who wants to talk about a monster in this review. There's a real hang up with these reviewers about a monster being in the film. I'm confused, though, as to why they only call it a monster or a lumpy monster, as Alison puts it. Could they not refer to the monster as Doomsday in these reviews? Did Warner Brothers tell them beforehand, like, you can't give this away? Don't tell people it's Doomsday. Refer to it as a monster. It seems like they were given some instructions not to do that, because it seems like all of them did this. So I find that interesting. I also think it's interesting that they mention that a monster's in the film, but they don't ever write about the significance of using Zod's body to create Doomsday and how it can connect to other things that are happening in BVS, like the Battle of Metropolis flashback. That's pretty important, that Superman is essentially fighting Zod 2.0. If I was Alison's editor, I would have nudged her on this too. I understand that they probably wouldn't want to spoil things about the film, but I think we all kind of knew it was Doomsday from that trailer where he first appeared. I don't know. This is just something that continues to be strange to me. Why all of these reviewers have such an issue with a monster being in the movie? So it's a little bizarre to me. Let's see. I'm gonna look into the live chat and see if there's any comments that I missed. Jay Niemeyer says a lot of these reviews don't have editors. Maybe they do, but maybe they're not so great at their jobs. I don't know. Maybe they didn't at all. Maybe they had no editor to look over these things. But I think there's always something in these reviews that there's little nuggets in there that if somebody just, a good editor will kind of make, kind of push you to dig in a little deeper. So I think it's unfortunate that a lot of times it doesn't seem like they have these. Denis or Dennis says, urban decay is like Gotham City in a nutshell. So yeah, I think that's a good description. I would love to dig more into that. Let's see. Yeah, and Denis or Dennis, let me know if I'm saying it wrong. This review is at least better than the last one, but that is not remotely hard, in my opinion. Yeah, well, we're going to have some ups and downs with these. Sometimes there's good aspects of them, and sometimes there's some really bad ones. But yeah, so some of these, we're gonna find they're a little more digestible than some other ones. But I think this one has some good elements into it. And so let's we're close to the end, so let's keep going. Alison writes, in 2005, Christopher Nolan, who's an executive producer on this film, made Batman Begins, a very good superhero movie. And in 2008, he made The Dark Knight, a very good movie, period, which changed old-fashioned perceptions of what could be achieved in the genre. But it created a model of what an important superhero pick looks like, with which Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice is hopelessly enamored, despite the fact that it doesn't come close to pulling off the same tricks in trying to pass off dourness as intelligence. Talking heads debate evolution and myth on television. The public turns on a dime, from venerating Superman as though he liberated a nation to burning him in effigy. And Bruce, having devoted his life to punishing wrongdoers, decides that his best legacy might as well be a murderous one. None of it adds up to anything except a world in which superheroes are unavoidable, smashing through buildings and setting up sequels by watching sneak previews of future Justice League colleagues. Why pose big questions when no one wants to hear the answer? Okay. Why mention Christopher Nolan's Batman films here? The only mention of him regarding BVS should be his executive producer credit, and that's it. This almost becomes a review about the Dark Knight trilogy. She really loves the Dark Knight trilogy. I do too. I don't disagree. But to Alison's credit, she does stop before it gets into fully a Dark Knight trilogy review. But I still don't think these kinds of comparisons should be made unless the Dark Knight trilogy was intentionally being used by Zack Snyder as an inspiration for BVS, which, as far as I know, isn't the case. You could argue that with Man of Steel and the use of flashbacks by David Goyer, who also wrote Man of Steel and Batman v Superman. At least he has a writing credit. I think most of the reworking of Batman v Superman was Chris Terrio, but David Goyer is in there. You could argue that Man of Steel borrowed a lot of things from the Dark Knight trilogy, including the flashback structure. It was very similar to Batman Begins in that regard. So I can understand that comparison. But in my opinion, the only inspirations I would allow in a review like this, if I was Alison's editor, would be The Dark Knight Returns and The Death of Superman. I think those are the two big inspirations for this film. You could also argue that Injustice would have been an inspiration for the nightmare sequence. But I wouldn't talk about anything other than maybe The Dark Knight Returns and The Death of Superman. Anything else, it just doesn't have any point to being here. Yes, the Batman Begins and The Dark Knight are awesome films. That has nothing to do with Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. Two different Batman actors and characterizations, two different directors, completely different universes. So it doesn't make any kind of sense to reference them here. But The Dark Knight Returns and the Death of Superman comics, those heavily influence the writing and the imagery of Batman v Superman. And to me, it would be fair to include references to those stories. Batman Begins, though, has nothing to do with anything except maybe the homage of young Bruce and the Bats in the opening title sequence. I would maybe grant you that, but Alison doesn't even mention that here. Alison also writes, quote, "Talking heads debate evolution and myth on television," unquote. This is where actually talking about The Dark Knight Returns influence would come in. Talking heads are all over that book. The news media and the anchors appear in panel after panel after panel in that book. So you could actually bring up The Dark Knight Returns here in that respect. Also, if Superman really did exist, don't you think that would be happening, that people in the news would be talking about it, that people would be debating it with their friends and their family and their neighbors? Everyone would be talking about it. All kinds of people would be talking about it, not just, famous people on TV. Everyone would be talking about it. And some people would love him and some people would hate him. The way BVS portrays it is actually how I think it really would happen in real life. So Alison writes a sentence that reads, quote, "Bruce, having devoted his life to punishing wrongdoers, decides his best legacy might as well be a murderous one," unquote. This, I think, is misleading. Saying that Bruce wants to be a murderer leaves out whole swaths of context here. He doesn't just want to go on a murderous rampage. He wants to take out Superman because he thinks Superman could take out all of humanity and nobody on Earth could stop him. Bruce believes that he's the only one who can attempt it. And he's actually proven correct here because he actually, at the end of the Batman and Superman fight, he has Superman down on the ground, damaged and vulnerable to kryptonite. And the only reason that Batman did not take care of that Kryptonian threat is because Lois Lane came in and intervened. So he actually was correct in the end that he was the only one who could stop Superman if Superman got out of control. So I think that the sentence leaves out the context of Bruce Wayne changing his ways at the end of the film. She paints Bruce as this murderous murderer who murders people. But she also leaves it, and maybe this is because she didn't want to spoil the ending, but it might be good to point out he's not just a murderer in the film. He changes by the end of it. He changes his ways, and it's visually depicted in him choosing not to brand Lex Luthor, which, as Alison points out, would have been a death sentence in prison for Lex. If he wanted Lex to die, he would have branded him with that bat symbol, but he doesn't. So Lex continues to live. Alison also writes, quote, "None of it adds up to anything," unquote. How? I'd love an explanation of this. I would nudge her on this. Please explain this thought. Alison also didn't like the Justice League teases in the film, but is this a critique? I know a lot of the reviewers have an issue with the Justice League teases. I get it. I think it's fair. But is it really a critique? Were the Justice League teases in BVS done poorly? If so, why? Didn't her beloved Batman Begins set up another film with the Joker at the end? Did she have an issue with that? Is that a problem? So I have a lot of questions about that. Alison ends her review by asking, quote, "Why pose big questions when no one wants to hear the answer," unquote. Okay, well, what to Alison are the big questions? She doesn't really say. I would want to know what she thinks the big questions in this film are. And who says no one wants to hear the answers? She should say that she didn't want to hear the answers. Never speak for anyone else. I try to make that a personal philosophy. I only try to speak for me because I cannot speak for anyone else. I would not want to speak for anyone else. But here she's once again speaking for the audience, and I don't personally think you should do that. So maybe she should have reworded this as why pose big questions when I don't want to hear the answer. I think that would make more sense. If I was Alison's editor, I'd have her start her review with a paragraph on what she thought the big questions were and then write why nobody wanted to hear them. Start off with the big questions and then write why you, Alison Willmore, did not want to hear them, and that be your conclusion. I would read that review. I would be more interested in that review because it would be focused. It would allow her to really put out her perspective and give more of her personality. I would actually love film reviews that took a more focused approach instead of, well, we got to talk about Superman, and we got to talk about Batman, and we got to talk about Lois Lane, and we got to talk about Wonder Woman, and we got to talk about Zack Snyder. I think her perspective about the big questions, which seems what she's getting to by the end of it, I think that would have been a more interesting approach with the review. You can talk about all those characters in the focused structure, but you don't have to like jump around to Lex to Batman to Superman. So if I was her editor, I'd probably have her be more focused in her structure. Maybe she could have started her review the same way with Lex Luthor and maybe talk about his problem of evil speech, saying that he was asking big questions about Superman. And then starting off with Lex Luthor in that case and ending this review the way she did would actually make sense. So I think there are some elements of this that if they were just tweaked a little bit, if somebody just kind of came behind her, read it, and then offered her a little feedback, I think this would be a much stronger review. So for me personally, I just find the structure of this piece lacking. It has a very jarring beginning. It's like, oh, why are we talking about Lex Luthor all of a sudden? And an ending that her ending doesn't have anything to do with the way she starts the piece. So I think it's a little strange in terms of how it's written. I would probably have come behind her and said, okay, I like some of your thoughts. Let's dig into this a little further. But that doesn't seem to be what has happened with this review. All right, so I'm going to look into the chat and see if we need to discuss some things. Let's see. Yeah, David points out, hey, at least she does not ask whether a Batfleck is a continuation of Bale's Batman. That's a real thing that happened in one of these reviews. So, so that's something good to point out. Let's see. People talking about Doomsday's appearance. So yeah, if you have any more thoughts that you want to share about this review, feel free to drop them in the live chat in the comment section. But I think that's going to do it for this week's review and analysis for the top from the top critics of Rotten Tomatoes, specifically this week from Alison Willmore of BuzzFeed. And if you did miss this live, I hope you'll consider sharing your thoughts about it in the comment section below. You can still do that even after the live stream has ended. If you ever have any questions about when I'm going to be live, because I'm going to try to do it every week, but there are going to be some weeks where I'm going to be out of town. I'll be out of town a lot coming up soon. So if I'm not going to be in town, I'm probably not going to do a live stream, but just check this YouTube channel, youtube.com/duckmilkprod, and you'll see when I've scheduled the live streams in advance according to when I'm available. So you'll be able to check that. And I wanted to put this out to everybody who has been watching these live streams. Thank you for doing that. And thank you for participating and sharing your thoughts. One of my regular viewers, David W., he actually sent me a Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice review that he enjoyed. It's a letterboxed review written by Bryant Tyler, and I've linked it in the video description of this video below. So if you want to go check that out, please do. And I just want to encourage everybody, if you have a BVS review that you'd like to share that you think is either meaningful to you or provided you with some value, or you just think was written well, comment in the comment section or drop me a link in the live stream chat, and I'll share it in future videos. It might be worthwhile as we do this this exploration into film criticism and talking about the ways people perceived Batman v Superman. We're talking a lot about these negative reviews from Rotten Tomatoes and the top critics there. Why don't we talk about the positive ones and talk about the ones that we think did a good job reviewing the film? I think that would also be a good exercise for us as we do these. So if you have a great review that you like and you want to share with the class, feel free to share it with me and I'll pass it along to everybody. And with that, I think I'm going to pass this over to voiceover Rebecca, and she's going to wrap up the live stream. If you would like to see more of these live streams, make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel at youtube.com/duckmilkprod. If you'd like to keep in touch with me personally, you can follow me on Instagram at TheDerbyKid and on Vero at DerbyKid. You can hear my thoughts on the CW Supergirl TV series and all things Kara Zor-El over at Supergirl Radio by visiting supergirlradio.com, subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts, or subscribing to the DC TV Podcast YouTube channel, which you can find at youtube.com/DCTV Podcasts. Also, please check out the Justice League Universe podcast for in-depth analysis on the DCEU films, including Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And before I go, I hope that this live stream video series will inspire you to think more critically and thoughtfully about film and storytelling. I'd like to leave you with this quote from C.S. Lewis's book titled An Experiment in Criticism. The truth is not that we need the critics in order to enjoy the authors, but that we need the authors to enjoy the critics. My name is Rebecca Johnson, and I love Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And I am publishing a series of videos exploring the reasons why I am such a fan of Zack Snyder's film. In this series, you'll find my thoughts on topics that matter to me, like Larry Fong's cinematography, character analysis on Lex Luthor and Lois Lane, the Christian imagery, what I find hopeful about the movie, and yes, I'll address the critical reception. So if you're interested in any of those topics, I hope you will get something out of this series and find out why Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice has had such a profound, heartfelt, and inspiring impact on my life.